Hello guys, this is Chetanvmehta from Skill Cubator, and in today's session we'll take a look at what is the role of a business analyst in the agile world. Because I get this question a lot that with agile taking over all other different models, is the role of the business analyst not applicable anymore? But that's not true, and let's discuss it why. Still, the role of a business analyst is important. It did not change. On the contrary, it has become much more important and much more demanding. So before we understand the role of a business analyst in the agile world, first let's understand a little bit about the agile, what it entails, what are the basic principles and tenets of an agile environment, and then we will build a case that what is the role of a business analyst in agile and where all it's applicable. So first thing first, agile is a philosophy, it's a discipline, it's not a framework per se, right? So agile is a generic term. Within the agile umbrella, we have different SDLC models or software engineering practices which fall under the agile umbrella. So what is agile? The basic principle of agile is to keep your SDLC lightweight so that you can deliver the software in much rapid successions at frequent intervals to your customer. The second thing is get the feedback from your customer early on in the project. Unlike the waterfall where you show the product at the very end of the SDLC phase and get the feedback from your customer, in agile you want to show your product even though it's 10% of the product or 20% of the product. You want to show your product, software, application much early in the life cycle so that you can get the feedback from your customer as early as you can, and based on the feedback you can improve the quality of the product. And the second thing is you keep delivering the software in small chunks in rapid successions. But that doesn't mean that the product is complete yet, but whatever you deliver must be complete. That means it must be designed, developed and tested thoroughly, and the product should be free of defects, gaps, bugs for those features which you have delivered. Now, way back in 1970, the first model which was popular was Waterfall Model, which was a plan-driven model, or people also call it a prescriptive model, because everything was predefined and each phase was supposed to do certain things, and then you move to the next phase and complete the work and complete the project. So it was very structured, very compartmentalized, stepwise fashion you would move, and there was no way to get the feedback from your customer early on, and there was also no way to deliver the software in small chunks. Then we started seeing all different SDLC models like Spiral, Rapid Application Development, Rational Unified Process, and many more. But they were still not truly agile. They were iterative and incremental. The third wave of the SDLC model focused on purely agile. And within the agile, you see different types of frameworks or software engineering practices, namely Scrum, Crystal, Kanban, Extreme Programming, Feature-Driven Development, DSDM, and the new generation of RUP. So all of these, they fall under the pure agile umbrella, where there are two concepts. One is to deliver the software in small chunks to the customer, free of defects, bugs, gaps. And the second one is to get the feedback from your customers early on in the project so that you can improve the quality of the project. So all of these SDLC models which fall under the Agile umbrella, they are adaptive in nature. They adapt to the changing requirements of your customers. And that is what the key driver of all these Agile practices are. All these SDLC models which fall under the Agile, the key driver is that the requirements may change from the time you start the project to the time you design and develop the project. So you want to build that flexibility, that agility in the SDLC phases so that you can adapt to the new changes. Whenever the customer requirements changes, you can accept those changes and build the product software according to the changing requirements. Now we will focus more on Scrum because in today's environment, most of the projects are being done based on the Scrum framework. Now, one important thing is, and that's where many people get confused, that why are we calling Agile Scrum? Isn't Agile Scrum itself? So as I said, Agile is a generic term. Within the Agile umbrella, you have different Agile SDLC models, and Scrum is one of them. So just to recap what Scrum is. So Scrum is basically a framework wherein you have three different roles: a product owner, the team, and the Scrum Master. The product owner is someone from the customer side who represents the stakeholders. He or she has complete knowledge on the project, the problems, the domain, and what needs to be done. So the requirements are coming from the product owner, and the business analyst will be working with the product owner to groom the product backlog. So this is a container of the requirements. It's one place where all the work which needs to be done to complete the project resides. The second one is your sprint planning meeting. So the work you have done here, the product backlog, the team will be picking the work. It will be pulling the work from the product backlog and see how much they can chew in for that particular sprint. So they will take a look at the product backlog. They will take the prioritized features and see how much they can do it in one sprint. Now, sprint is a time-boxed element ranging from 1 week to 4 weeks. Depending on the project environment, you can pick anyone from 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, but you must complete the work within that time-boxed sprint. So for example, if I have a sprint for 2 weeks, the team will decide how much work they can complete in those 2 weeks. So they will pull the work only that much they can do it in those 2 weeks. And that's what the sprint backlog is all about. When I say complete, that means it must be designed, developed, and tested free of defects, bugs, gaps. So if the user was supposed to use it, it would work end to end. So they take the work, they put that in the sprint backlog. The sprint runs for whatever duration you have selected, from 1 week to 4 weeks, whatever time interval you have selected. So in this case, let's assume that we have selected it for 2 weeks. Our sprint duration is 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, the team will work towards all the stories which have been committed as part of the sprint backlog and complete and give it to the product owner. So as part of the sprint review meeting, the product owner is invited to see the product, and the product owner will give the feedback, and based on the feedback we will refine the product in the next sprint. So this is at a very high level. Of course, there are a lot of details to discuss, but for this session we don't want to focus on the Scrum framework itself. We want to focus on the role of a business analyst in the Scrum environment. Now, where do a business analyst fall in this entire framework? The most important role of a business analyst is to work with the product owner, PO, to groom the product backlog. That's a continuous process that needs to happen throughout the project. So you need to build a cadence, that is every week, once in a week or twice in a week. You need to work with the product owner and groom the product backlog, write the epics, write the stories, write the acceptance criteria, and any other supporting documentation which needs to be done in order to complete that story. So this is a continuous process which will happen outside the sprint. You don't want to write the stories when your sprint is in flight. You want to write the stories much before that happens. That's one part of the BA, to work with the PO to groom the product backlog on a continuous basis and build some cadence. Now, even in sprint planning meeting, when the team is pulling the work from the sprint backlog, or the product backlog, sorry, not the sprint backlog, the product backlog, the team may need some help understanding what those user stories are, what the acceptance criteria is, and what that needs to be done. So again, the business analyst will need to play a role of a facilitator and do a requirements walkthrough with the team to explain what those requirements are. Because it may be possible that the team may not have been involved when the user stories were being groomed, and you as a BA and the product owner were writing these user stories. So they may need some help in understanding what those user stories are. And as a business analyst, you must give them a detailed requirements walkthrough in the sprint planning meeting, or possible you can also do it before that. You can do a pre-sprint planning meeting in which you explain all the stories and all the acceptance criteria, so that when the team comes for the sprint planning meeting, they have all the knowledge to do their planning estimation, and they are able to pull the work from the product backlog which they can complete in that sprint. So that's the second way the business analyst can support the team. Now, when the sprint is in flight, that is, the sprint is in progress, the team is working on it, heads down, design, development, and testing, do we need business analyst in that sprint? I feel yes, you still need the business analyst. The business analyst will play a supporting role when the sprint is in flight. The reason being, and that's my experience, that the team will always have some questions regarding the requirements, or they may find some gaps in the requirements which the product owner and the business analyst might have overlooked. So when the sprint is in flight, either the developers or the testers may come back to a business analyst and ask them the questions, and if the business analyst has the answers to it, he or she must give it right then and there, because you don't want to jeopardize the sprint which is in flight. Every day is important, so you want to give the answers to the questions right then and there. Or if you as a business analyst don't have the answers, you must reach out to the product owner at the earliest and get the answers to the team. That's another way you can support the sprint. And in the final part of the sprint, when you are doing the sprint review meeting and you're inviting the product owner for seeing the product, again, the business analyst can play a very crucial role in terms of getting the feedback from the product owner. Of course, the entire sprint team is involved in it, but the business analyst has the highest stake in getting the feedback from the product owner, and based on the feedback, you can improve the subsequent sprints and build the product which exactly meets the needs and wants of your product owner. Now, do we have a dedicated Scrum Master in all the projects? And can the business analyst also play a role of a Scrum Master in this environment? The answer is definitely a business analyst can play a role of a Scrum Master in this environment. Now, most of the times, you don't have a dedicated Scrum Master who is just playing the role of a Scrum Master on a project. Of course, there are exceptions to it. If the project is big, you must have a dedicated Scrum Master. But if possible, to save the cost to the project, you can always assign the role of a Scrum Master to the business analyst. The reason being, when the sprint is in flight, your technical lead, your developers, testers are heads down working on design, development, and testing the software. You don't want to add some overheads to them by giving them the role of a Scrum Master. Whereas the business analyst is more active in this part, grooming the product backlog, and less active when the sprint is on. So you may want to consider assigning the role of a Scrum Master to the business analyst, because as we all know, the role of a Scrum Master is more like a facilitator, as a coach, helping the team moving towards the goal of the sprint, removing all the distractions, making sure the team is not facing any issues, technical, people skills, politics, whatever it is. So that's again one way a business analyst can contribute in this environment. Now, this is just another way of looking at the entire Scrum framework. So what we call is, there are two different sides to the coin. One is the value team and one is the delivery team. So the value team is more towards grooming the product backlog, understanding what needs to be done, writing the epic stories, acceptance criteria, and all the supporting documentation that needs to be done in order to help your delivery team to design, develop, and test the code. So the value team is more product owner, business analyst, and the governance part of it. Like, it can be a project managers, program managers, or a policy group. All those people who are from the business stakeholder side would fall under the value team. And if you see here, the business analyst is a key member in the value team, because he or she will be working closely with all these business stakeholders, mainly from the product owner side, and work with him or her to groom the product backlog. On the other side, we have the delivery team, which mainly consists of tech leads, architects, developers, testers, information assurance people, UI, UX, technical writers, Scrum Master. So again, as I said in the previous slide, that a business analyst can also play a role of a scrum master, because you don't want to add overheads to your developers, architect, tech leads, testers by adding this role to them, because they want to focus heads down in design, development, and testing the software. And again, the business analyst will be required when the sprint is on, because any of these people may have some questions regarding the requirements, and the best person to answer them is the business analyst. So if you see, there is no dilution of the role of a business analyst in agile world, but it is much more demanding than before. In the previous waterfall world, once you do the requirements, your job is over. But not in agile world. You are constantly working with different stakeholders right from day one of the project. As the sprint is kicked off, you have to support the sprint as well. At the same time, you support the product owner. So the role of a business analyst is much more demanding than before, and it's much more challenging. Now, this is just a comparison of all the different agile models, some of them. So as you see here, extreme programming, Scrum is where we are focusing. Then we have the DSDM, feature driven development, AST, adaptive software development, and Crystal. These are different SDLC models which fall under the agile umbrella. But we'll focus more on the Scrum. Now, if you see here, one of the things in the documentation part is basic documentation. It doesn't tell you don't document requirements. It just tells you document just enough for the team to understand. So many people get confused that in Agile you don't need any documentation. But that's not true. You need documentation, but yes, you may want to focus more on delivering the actual software than on writing a big documents. So let's take a look at what we need to do as a business analyst in terms of elicitation, analysis, and documentation in Agile environment. So these are some of the things which I think are very important for a business analyst, especially in an Agile environment. So as part of elicitation, you want to get the requirements from your stakeholders. You want to draw out those hidden requirements from your stakeholders. So how do you do that? So these are simple techniques which I have used. These are tried and tested, and I have seen in many different projects. These are used and they are successfully used. So the first one is a user story writing workshops. So what will happen is you as a business analyst will work with the product owner and write these user stories, acceptance criteria, identify the hidden stories, split the big epics into small stories. Everything will be done in these workshops. So you along with the PO will do it on a continuous basis, and you need to set some cadence once a week, twice a week, depending on the complexity of the project and the duration of the project. You may want to set that cadence so that you can have a constant grooming of the product backlog. The second technique is your requirements walkthrough sessions. So as I discussed, that when the sprint is on and the team is ready to pull the work from the product backlog and do an estimation and add it to the sprint backlog and start the sprint, they may need your help to understand what those user stories are. So you may want to do a requirements walkthrough sessions with your sprint team and with your extended stakeholders, because you want to be transparent with all these requirements, and the main goal of these requirements is not to document and store them in some safe place. The main goal is to collaborate and communicate. So you want to talk these requirements, you want to talk it out to different stakeholders as much as possible, and make sure that all the doubts, all the pending questions, the gaps are addressed as early as you can. The third technique is your sprint review meeting. So when you go for the sprint review meeting with your product owner, the product owner will give you some feedback. Now that feedback can be again looped in and stored in your product backlog. So this is a third venue where your requirements elicitation can also happen. The product owner may give you some feedback. Based on the feedback, you may have to ask some relevant questions. It can be done in the sprint review meeting, or it can be done offline, but that's where you will be getting more input, more feedback from your product owner, and that will be added to the product backlog. So that's again a requirements elicitation channel. Now let's take a look at the analysis, a very key aspect of the Agile environment. Because in Agile, you don't write FRDs and BRDs and huge use cases, but you focus on some basic documentation which is just good enough for the team to design, develop, and test. So the first one is your business system context diagram, a very simple way of putting things into perspective and see what the system is all about, how it's connected to different external entities, internal entities, what data is being exchanged, all of these things. The second one is your business process diagram. As a business analyst, you must have a good knowledge on how to map out your processes as is to be. Cannot stress more on this. I mean, this is one of the most key analysis techniques a BA must master. And the reason being, this can be understood by a variety of audience, whether it's a non-technical audience or a technical audience. A business process diagram, flowcharts can be understood by all of these folks. You might have heard about a picture is worth 1,000 words. A use case diagram, a very good way of scoping out the system. The next one is user persona analysis. Now, this is a very key aspect of Scrum Agile. This is not used in any of the non-Agile techniques. So in user persona, what you do is you come out with a fictitious character and imagine how that character would use the system. What are the traits, characteristics, behavior, likes, dislike, attitude? All of these things will be considered as part of this user persona analysis. Related to that, we have the extreme characters. It's an extension of user persona. But here in extreme characters, you think about those wild case scenarios when a user might use a system in certain way. So you don't want to miss out on those actors who might be using your system once in a while, but they are also part of your ecosystem. The next one is the state chart diagram. Basically, you want to show how the object changes its states based on certain events or triggers and the entire life cycle of that state of that object. And the last but very important is the wireframes and mockups. So wireframes and mockups, I can say you can say they are the low fidelity prototypes which are used in communicating how the system will look like, what will be the features, the navigation part, so the customers can visualize the system even before you write the first piece of code. And these are not a very, you can say, complex. They are very simple in nature. You can just use a whiteboard or a piece of paper or a simple tool like Balsamiq or Mockflow or Visio. Any tools can be used to come up with a low fidelity prototypes. And the last thing is the documentation. Now, I get this question a lot that in Agile Scrum, you don't have any documents. You don't need to write any documents. But that's not true. You can see in this list, we have a bunch of different artifacts which you can write as part of Scrum. The first one is your epic user stories acceptance criteria. That is what you will be doing in your product backlog grooming. But that's not enough. That may not be enough for the team to understand the detailed requirements. So the rule is, there is no such rule. That's the thing. You do whatever it takes for the team to understand. If your team is well accustomed to see the use case specifications, you can write them, but don't write them in a detailed fashion. You just write them in a light fashioned way. A synopsis of a use case specifications can be used instead of writing a detailed specifications. You can support them with wireframes and mockups so that they can be more visualized and the team can understand better than just writing some high-level requirements. You can also do the business process narratives. The process diagrams which you have done here, you can write some narratives around that, some textual descriptions regarding those processes as is to be. The wireframes and mockups can be used anywhere along with any of these documentation. These especially goes with your user stories. It can also go along with your use case specifications. So it will add a visual context to your system, not just a textual. The next one is your data dictionary. Now, if you're building a system which is data intensive, you're capturing data information from your customers, from your internal users. You may want to capture what those data elements are, what the rules around those data elements are. For example, data, is it required, optional, maximum, minimum limit, whether it's a numeric, alphanumeric, or alphabets. All of those things you can capture in your data dictionary. So it's basically the metadata for those data elements. You may also want to consider writing the business rules repository in a separate document and store it in one location, because the rules can be referred, they can be reused, they can be fed into the rules engine. So you want to use this document as your one-stop shop for storing all your rules. So as you can see here, there are different elicitation techniques, analysis techniques, and documentation artifacts which you can still use in Agile world. So There is a shift in how we used to do requirements in the traditional waterfall world, where you would write the big BRDs, FRDs, huge use case specifications, and get a sign off, get them approved baseline. In Agile, you keep them lightweight and you can always update as and when you get more information. So don't think that these are baseline and they cannot be updated once they are signed off. There is nothing like sign off in Agile. You show it to your product owner, he or she says, yes, this is what I want. Maybe 1 week from now, it may change and you may want to come back and update it. Right? So that's about the role of a business analyst in Agile world. So thanks for watching this video, and for all your training needs, please do contact me on 703-200-9921. You can email us back on info@skillcubator.com, which is info@skillcubators, skillcubator.com, and that's our website, which is www.skillcubator.com. Thanks and see you again.